Welcome to the Kara's Cure Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness for your mind, body, and spirit. I'm Kara Sundlin. So today we're exploring our emotional intelligence. How strong is it? And can you measure it? Does it actually affect how much money we make? Dr. Robin McKay would say yes to the above, and she is joining us right now. Dr. McKay, thank you for being with us.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is definitely your wheelhouse. I want to start with, we hear this buzzword of emotional intelligence a lot, or EQ even, but what exactly is emotional intelligence?
Emotional intelligence is made up of a couple of different components. One way that we look at emotional intelligence is my ability or your ability to evaluate, understand, and express our own emotions. But there's another part to it, and that part is to be able to do the same for other people. So to empathize, to be able to name and understand other people's emotions as well.
So some of us might think we're good at this or admit that we're not good at it, but you actually say there is a way to measure it with something called an NEO test. What is that?
Yes. So the NEO personality profile is the gold standard of personality assessments that most personality psychologists have used at least for the last 50 years or so. So there's a lot of evidence that supports this notion of emotional intelligence. The NEO, by the way, isn't the only way to evaluate emotional intelligence. There's also a lot of self-assessments. You could probably go online right now and find a self-assessment to determine how emotionally intelligent you are. But where I sit with the NEO, because of my background as a clinician, as a psychologist, I can give this assessment and really get a good sense of how emotionally intelligent somebody is compared to everybody else.
Okay.
I don't always espouse for comparing emotional intelligence or any other characteristic to everyone else, because comparison can be sometimes depressing actually for people. But in this case, it's really nice to know how much emotional have compared to everybody else.
So can we improve it? Is it a fixed thing, or can we become more emotionally intelligent?
So for some people, it is more of a fixed thing. In other words, we can all be learned to some degree to become more self-aware, to learn how to regulate our emotions even better than we do right now through emotional self-regulation. We can learn how to become more empathetic toward other people and toward our own experiences as well. But there are some people who are quite adept already at emotional intelligence, and they're the ones who I'm really seeing are standing out as leaders who don't necessarily have to be taught how to be emotionally intelligent so much as that it just comes very naturally to them.
And so this actually certainly has some value to our self-worth, and we'll get into that in a moment. But you're finding, as you coach people who are landing very high income, even C-suite positions, that emotional intelligence is now something that's very valued and can actually lead to you making more money.
Exactly, and that bears out in the research as well. There was recent research that that Goldman did in, I think, 2021, where he really started linking emotional intelligence with not just high performance, but how well we do financially in our jobs. And, you know, the truth is, the more we get AI involved with work, the more the rote things become sort of automated by machines and by AI and bots, the more important it is for us humans to really double down on the thing that makes us unique, which is our emotional intelligence. What we see among top leaders is that emotional intelligence, the ability to read a room, to be able to tune into what's going on with your team, who needs a little pat on the back, who needs some encouragement, who needs some extra motivation, is really a gift, not just to your own leadership and career trajectory, but to the entire team in terms of productivity, in terms of creativity and innovation as well.
So in a way, it sounds like it's really a shift, because we're hearing a lot of work coming out where sensitivity is the new strong. And it used to be something, I think, especially as women, if you're sensitive, you tried to hide that or be tougher. But you're finding, as you work with some of your clients, even those who have a higher emotional intelligence actually even have a better intuition. And leaning on that can be a real strength.
That can be a real strength. now more than ever before, I think it's safer for people who are emotionally intelligent to come out, and even intuitive to come out and say that this is one of my superpowers or this is one of my abilities. Because as I see it in the next 3 to 5 years, really, that leadership is going to start hiring for emotional intelligence because they're understanding the value of caring about other people. So it's not just about the bottom line. It's just not about productivity necessarily or grinding things out anymore, but instead it's really creating more of a kinder and gentler work environment for everybody. That doesn't mean, by the way, that just because we're emotionally intelligent that we're going to bring all of our emotions to work and lay them out on the table and be very angry or very frustrated or very hostile. Quite the opposite, actually, because one of the gifts of emotional intelligence is that regulation of emotions, being able to be poised under pressure, not to suppress emotions necessarily, but to use and leverage them in a way that motivates and inspires the people around you to do their best work.
So I want to let our listeners and viewers know that you actually have a website, and I headed there, and there's a quiz you can take. Just
Yes.
not the NEO assessment. That's a little deeper. I've never had that before, but I did take the quiz because that was pretty quick. So I won't make you guess because we've only known each other for a few minutes, but I came out as a collaborative leader, which says I'm exceptionally attuned to a team's dynamics and connections, and my leadership style is based on compassion and my empathic heart chakra. So I guess I would say that seemed true. I use my heart as well as my brain when I'm trying to make decisions or dealing with people, I think.
And that is the marker of the emotional intelligent leader, is the collaborative leader. Now, listen, all of the different leadership styles play out in each of our experiences, but there's usually one that stands out as primary. And for you, I'm not surprised that you're a collaborative leader. That's one of the gifts, is to be able to kind of tune into what other people are needing in the workplace. But here's the challenge, is that oftentimes collaborative leaders, emotionally intelligent leaders, take on the weight of the team. They become sort of the emotional dumping ground, if you will, sometimes for what's going on the teams. And so it can create overwhelm. It can create symptoms of burnout as well that we really have to be mindful of. Because here's the thing, just because you can feel somebody else's emotions doesn't mean that you're meant to process them. In fact, we can't process other people's emotions. So we have to learn how to practice, I'm going to say, energy and emotion hygiene, so that we're crystal clear in our perceptions of our own emotions and those of other people. And we're able to make decisions based on that clarity rather than based on the muddiness that sometimes comes from trying to take on other people's emotions or trying to sort of manage all of the emotions in the room.
Yeah, and when you talk about that, I guess what we're talking about, to make it clear for people who are like, gosh, that's me. I take on everyone's thing. And then you might be feeling burnt out or overwhelmed or more irritable. I mean, all these things that sensitive folks will we become a dumping ground. So let me start with, since this is your expertise, how do you know if it's your stuff or someone else's stuff that's making you feel that?
That's such a great question. So I want to take us back to, let's say, even high school, but definitely college. If you ever went into a class that you were super prepared for the exam, but you were also a little bit on edge about, do I know my stuff well enough? And then somebody behind you would start chattering about, did you study for this? And did you study for that? And what do you think about this? And you could feel your own emotions rising. You can tell if it's your emotions or somebody else based on how you feel before you walk into the room.
Before you walk into the room.
Before you walk into the room. So if I'm feeling poised, if I'm feeling confident, and then I walk into a room and there's some wonky energy and there's some nervousness or there's some anxiety or even some hostility or anger, when you feel that, you can be pretty sure that it's not yours. That doesn't, so in other words, you're kind of swimming in it.
Okay.
We have mirror neurons in our brain that reflect and amplify other people's emotions. So you can understand why it would be confusing about, I'm feeling this, so it must be mine. So we have to be more mindful and discerning about, is this mine or is it somebody else's?
Yeah, well, I love that there's some science behind this, because I know you bridge the world between the spiritual and the scientific. Some would talk about, oh, my intuition is really good and I'm very empathic and I can see and feel things, and I'm more spiritual. And a lot of us fall into that camp, I think, especially as women. We know we've got good intuition, but you're saying this is also very scientific. So what do you advise your clients to do to leverage this?
Well, first of all, we have to practice self-awareness. We have to be aware of what we're feeling in any given moment. And I'm not talking about being hypervigilant, but I am talking about kind of doing a temperature check pretty regularly throughout the day. How am I feeling? Being able to identify how you're feeling and then what you need based on what you're feeling are two very empowering things that you can do for yourself, for your teams, for your children and your family members as well. So when we are feeling a little bit irritated or frustrated, we can tune in and say, is this mine or is this somebody else's? If it's somebody else's, we can usually just let it go, move around a little bit, go take a brain break for 5 minutes, get out in the sunshine, do something different in order to shift the energy. But the thing I always remind my clients is, and this will be good for everybody, I think, is that you don't have to sit in an emotion that is not yours. That's not your responsibility. So you have a right to get up, move around, change the channel, if you will, so that you can start feeling better. Because we know this, Caro, that when you're feeling your best, you're going to perform your best. And the way that we learn how to perform our best is by being self-aware and then learning emotional self-regulation. So I'm an emotionally intelligent person. I pay attention to how I'm feeling. I can name my emotions, but sometimes I run a little bit anxious. Yeah. So the anxiety is actually based in the nervous system. So I have to learn how to manage and regulate my nervous system so that my anxiety doesn't get the best of me.
And there's a lot, that's probably a whole nother show, but there's a lot on the internet right now. If people are on Instagram following people who, if you're interested in healing and emotional intelligence and our gifts and all that, you're probably seeing a lot about there about hashtag healing your nervous system. And those of us who tend to be a little hypervigilant, I guess we also might be the ones who are more sensitive and can read a room.
Yes. In fact, one of the things that I have found using the NEO assessment and just all of the experience that I've had is that we have all of our emotions and experiences get filtered through the nervous system. So if the nervous system is wired, what I call hot, if it's anxious, depressed, really sensitive to stress, you're going to pick up on those kinds of emotions more easily than those people who have nervous systems that are really sort of steady Eddie. If it was a color, they would be, the nervous system would probably be blue rather than red. And so they may not pick up on the emotions in the room as well as people like you and me who probably do have more sensitive nervous systems. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to regulate our nervous system. In fact, my yoga teacher just told me this. He said that he feels like it's his responsibility to regulate his nervous system because his kids look to him to help them regulate their nervous systems.
That's so important. And I want to, we have so many moms who listen to this, and I love, I'm a mom myself. I have now 2 teenagers, a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. So there's a lot of energy in my house, and I know everyone can relate to that. But that was actually one of my next questions. I think my son is wired like me. He can run hot. He can be short fused. Different because he's a boy, so I don't know that they like to talk about. My daughter will talk about feelings and sensitivity more. He probably doesn't want to talk about that. But I definitely notice that if we get into it, he gets bigger. And that's a lot of responsibility on me to not get triggered. So how do you think we need to navigate that as parents, especially with these mirror neurons? How much of what we're feeling or doing is really impacting our kids?
Well, so much of it is our kids are so sensitive and they're paying attention to us, whether we're aware of it or not. They're looking to us as their role models, how to behave in certain situations. And I think it's our responsibility to really look at our own nervous systems and practice before you get into the situation where you've got a kiddo or even a coworker who's got really big energy, making sure that you're able to regulate your own emotions makes it easier. It's not foolproof. And there are many times that I feel my emotions rising when I get in certain situations that are intense or highly emotional. But being able to just be aware of and regulate and come back into neutral and to not grab on to those heightened emotions can really actually be soothing for the person that you're with as well.
Okay, so maybe you can help us with a script. Let's say, I think people get this, but then they don't know what to do, and we're wired to just react. So let's say you feel that emotion either at a coworker, it's rising, or very commonly with moms who often feel guilty later after they've yelled at their kids and they're on their last nerve. So what do we do so that we can practice not getting carried away by our nervous systems?
Not escalating it. That's an ongoing practice, first of all. But in the moment, let's start with in the moment.
Yeah,
the first thing that you can do, step one, walk away. Sometimes that's the best approach, actually. One of the things that we know for sure is that when we use our words, when we say what we're feeling out loud, the areas of the brain that are involved in heightened emotion, the amygdala in particular, that's involved in anger and frustration. So when we use our words, we're actually deactivating the amygdala and reactivating the language centers in the brain and our layers of executive functioning as well. So we're actually de-escalating our own nervous system just by saying out loud, I'm noticing that I'm feeling stressed out right now.
Okay.
I'm noticing that my heart is pounding right now. So we bring it into the moment and we give these very clear and specific awarenesses that we are noticing in our bodies out loud. And that helps to begin to regulate the nervous system.
So that gives a lot more grit, I guess, to understand why. Sometimes you'll hear, name it to tame it. But that's why, because we're actually switching gears in our brain when we start using words.
Yes. Yes. Isn't that fascinating how you can actually, it takes some time to do this and it's not instantaneous. But when you keep talking and you keep noticing, I'm noticing that I'm feeling stressed. I'm noticing that I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm noticing. And then you can ask yourself the next question, what do I need right now?
Okay.
I need to walk away. I need a hug.
Well, you know, this came up at work. I had a young woman that we talk about these kinds of things, and I, you know, she knows I do this show, so she was feeling very stressed, and she's like, oh gosh, the energy in here or something, and I'll just deal with it. And I guess I'll have to just deal with it when I get home. And I thought, in all my experience of interviewing experts like you, or even taking, there's a course that I'll recommend for our Connecticut folks here at Copper Beach Institute called Mindfulness-Based Self-Compassion. One of the easiest things was, they said, no, ask yourself, like, just go to the bathroom and put your hand in your hair and go, what do I need right now? And take 3 breaths. So when we're in it, and it's during the day, and we feel like we don't have time to stop, that's actually not the right thing to just let it build all day, right? We want to take care of ourselves in the moment.
You have a right and a responsibility to take care of yourself in the moment. That runs counter to the old way of working, which is grit it out, ignore it, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and keep going. That's the mindset, the attitude, and the practices that are on their way out of the workplace. It is much more, it's responsible actually to be able to say, I'm going to take 5 minutes. Not I need to, but I'm going to take 5 minutes and reset. Nothing wrong with that. No harm, no foul. In fact, when you do that, you're actually bringing back your best self into the workplace rather than trying to compress it, set it aside, and then you know what happens when you do that. It overflows somewhere else.
That makes so much sense, because we as newscasters, I'm going to say, we do that all the time. We have pause buttons and we just go, 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 go. And then you wonder why at the end of the day you're really moody or something. And this could be in any industry. But the idea is that it's kind of like taking out the trash, right? As these things happen, we all have a minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes to just do that reset. And it's going to be we're going to be more productive with our families or our jobs after, right? So besides walking away, what would be walk away? What do I need right now? What else does a reset look like that we can start doing?
Practice mindfulness of breath, meaning that your breath is always with you. So you can breathe in and breathe out and know when you're breathing in and know when you're breathing out. Now, I will say this, when you're in a heightened emotional experience with another person, that can be challenging to do. So you'll want to practice that outside of those intense experiences. So when you get in your car to drive home, that's what you're doing. You put your hands on your steering wheel and you just take 5 deep mindful breaths where you're paying attention on purpose to your breath. Basically, what you're doing is training your awareness to come back into the present moment. When you're in the present moment, here's the cool thing, is that then you get to make all kinds of good decisions, positive decisions for yourself in terms of what you require in this moment, rather than what you might have required a month ago or a year ago. So you bring yourself back into the present moment by practicing mindfulness of breath. This is something that you can take out of the workplace and bring it into the rest of your life as well.
So having those mindfulness snacks, like just making it part of your day, I often say, us women, we often, go to the restroom a lot, whether you're actually powdering your nose or going to the restroom, but maybe you're going to just fill your tank each time, that every time you go to the restaurant, make sure you're taking a couple deep breaths. Or if you're walking to the copier to get that piece of paper off of it, can you feel your feet? Can you take a breath? We can do this in our daily grind. We can make it a more sacred grind, just step by step.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and eventually we'll just take the word grind out of work entirely and let it be more in flow than grind. Hopefully that's where we're headed. And I will say, Kara, that you mentioned just noticing your how you're walking, how you're stepping. That's another mindfulness practice that brings you back into the present moment. See, here's the thing. When we are in the present moment, we can become responsive rather than reactive. That in itself is a sign of emotional self-regulation, to be responsive, to notice what you're feeling, to be aware of it and say, oh, I feel myself getting triggered by this. Well, guess what? We're each responsible for our own triggers.
Yeah.
And so in taking responsibility for how you're feeling and being able to regulate your emotions, to be able to regulate your nervous system, that is what's going to build the emotional intelligence muscle.
So it's a muscle. We practice this and we get better. It's not like, oh, Lydia, you're really, we say, Dr. Blake, you're amazing at this, and I can never be that way. We can do this.
You can, and it does take responsibility, and it takes a decision to do that. And I think that's the hardest thing. We talk a lot about people who are overwhelmed and burned out. We've gotten to a point where when you reach the point of burnout, there are a lot of things that have led up to that. So taking a few deep mindful breaths isn't going to be an immediate game changer. What we're really talking about here is a lifestyle change, so that when you are regularly paying attention on purpose to your breath, to the steps that you make, you're training the brain to stay present. And over time, what the research shows, that when you're regularly meditating, when you're regularly paying attention on purpose, you're going to see some changes, not just your experiential changes, but also even in the brain, we see increases in your executive functioning, and the amygdala actually starts to shrink over time over the course of a meditation practice.
I have read that, and we're speaking with Dr. Robert McKay, who's helping us understand emotional intelligence. There's the NEO test. Well, let me ask you this. Do you think everybody, I know there's probably cost, but do you think everyone benefits from getting a NEO test? Or what could we do instead if you don't want to pay the money or you're not going to a psychologist?
So I always use the NEO with leaders, especially in my coaching practice, because it helps me really understand not just their emotional intelligence, but their creativity. It helps me understand their nervous system and what they're up against as they're filtering through all of the experiences that they're going through in the day. So if you are a leader, I think that there is profound benefit to taking the NEO and having it interpreted by somebody who understands the interaction between your personality and your leadership style and how you just move through the world. If it's not something for everybody that is necessary to take, you can certainly go on and just do a simple self-assessment of your emotional intelligence. There's a ton of research and free resources in the field of positive psychology that really helps people develop emotional intelligence. And then, the leadership quiz that I have on my website is a really good starting point, actually, because it does get at what is your major leadership style. Some of our viewers are going to score like you did, being a collaborative leader, somebody who does have that emotional intelligence as a leadership style. There are others who are going to be visionary leaders, who can see what's possible in the future. And that's going to be their major leadership style. Anything that you can do to become more self-aware and understand yourself better is going to help you in terms of developing emotional intelligence, developing leadership, being a better parent, a better partner, just being a better human, actually.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at our kids as moms, are kids just naturally more empathic? I know that their prefrontal cortex, which I guess is where our executive function is not really formed until much later. So I'm wondering, when you're thinking about looking at your kids and trying to teach emotional intelligence or knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are, what's your advice with our kids?
So there is a subgroup of children who do have an aptitude for emotional intelligence and who are quite intuitive relative to the population. In other words, most people, whether it's children, adolescents, or adults, are going to have about an average ability when it comes to emotional intelligence. So always my advice for parents working with their kids on emotional intelligence: help them learn how to name their emotions. Help them learn how to understand what that emotion means for them. And then in terms of the regulation part, then you can help them move. Like, what do you need right now in order to feel better? When a child learns how to do this at 3, 4, 5 years old, think about the trajectory of that child's life, rather than what you and I and our generation have experienced with emotions, that emotions are bad or we shouldn't talk about them. And the men in our lives who oftentimes have been socialized that the only appropriate emotion for them is anger, unless of course they're in celebration from some sports event. And I know that's a broad generalization, but really it has an effect on so many people in the world. So we have to, the more comfortable we get talking about emotions, naming them, nurturing them, the easier it's going to be to really start to celebrate emotional intelligence as one of our greatest gifts.
So in our final minute or so together, let me just ask you, also, you mentioned men and women, and I think there's definitely a difference, of course, of how we're socialized, but does one sex have better emotional intelligence, or it could be great across both sides?
It can be great across both sides. The way that emotionally intelligent men are going to express it is going to look a little bit different depending on the societal and cultural influences that they've encountered through their lives. We have this tendency to polarize or dichotomize the gender when it comes to emotions, but even within each gender, there are so many differences, right? So that this is very much an individual experience that people have with their emotional intelligence. The key is to learn about your emotions, to honor it. And I have to tell you, Kara, I've got more men coming into my executive coaching practice than I ever have at this point. And I really think a lot of them are just being called to process through some of the traumas that they've had as young men, as children around emotions, and to really embrace their emotional intelligence as one of their greatest gifts that they're bringing into their leadership.
Doctor, just we're going to run out of time, but shout out where people can name your website, and I'll make sure to post it online, but let people know where they can go and take your assessment.
Sure, drrobinmckay.com/leadership quiz. And I can't wait to see what people are getting in terms of the leadership styles. It'll be a lot of fun.
All right, Dr. Robin McKay, we're all going to work on our EQ. Thank you so much, and thanks for being here for Kara's Cures.